how a single mistake sank this empire in 24 hours. The Salarian Gate, on the northern side of Rome, opens from the inside out. 40,000 Visigoth warriors advance through the entrance of the capital of the greatest empire the world has ever seen. The city had not fallen to an external enemy for nearly 800 years, since before Alexander the Great. Now, in just 3 days, Rome will burn, and the man responsible for this is not here. To grasp the scale of this, imagine Washington, D.C., London, and Paris as a single city, ruling half the planet for 1,000 consecutive years. Roman legions patrol from Scotland to Egypt, from Portugal to Iraq. About 15% of the world's population answers directly or indirectly to a single throne, and that throne is about to turn to kindling. The most absurd part is what is not happening. There is no world war, no apocalyptic plague, no tsunami, earthquake, or volcanic eruption. There is only one decision made years earlier by a single man in a palace hundreds of kilometers away. An execution, a name crossed off a list. And from that moment on, the greatest empire in history enters systemic collapse as if it were nothing. How long does it take for 1,000 years of civilization to crumble when you make the right mistake? The answer is not centuries, it is not generations. Between the moment that decision was signed and the moment it became irreversible, about 24 hours passed, the time it took for the news to travel from Ravenna to the camp of an offended king. Everything after that was merely slow-motion consequence. Who was executed? Why? And how did the death of a single man truly open the gates of the most heavily defended city on earth? To answer that, we must go back 15 years, to the day a 13-year-old boy inherited a throne he never should have touched, and handed the fate of the entire empire into the hands of a general who was half Roman, half barbarian. Chapter 1. The Last Guardian. On a freezing morning in early April 402, a mass of Visigoths advances toward Milan in final attack formation. There are no cannons, but the ground shakes as if there were, tens of thousands of shields, spears and war wagons moving forward, while nearly 80,000 Roman soldiers retreat in disarray. Emperor Honorius, just over 20 years old, has already fled to Ravenna, hidden behind marshes and walls, as far from the noise as he can get. Between that column of invaders and the collapse of the western half of the empire, there is essentially one man left. Flavius Stilicho, son of a Vandal father and a Roman mother, pulls the reins of his white horse, turns to the troops who still listen to him, and gives the only possible order: no one retreats. Today there is no withdrawal, only glory or burial. But this is not a story about a great victory. It is the story of the man who, without knowing it, ensured that when the final mistake was made, there would be no one left capable of correcting it. To understand why an empire of more than 70 million people ended up depending on someone who had not even been born in Rome, we need to go back 7 years. More precisely, to January 23rd, 395 AD, the day Theodosius the Great died, leaving 2 heirs. Arcadius, 18 years old, took control of the Eastern Empire, richer, more stable, ruled from Constantinople. Honorius, only 13, inherited the West, half the territory, a quarter of the wealth, and practically all the borders in flames. The problem was not his age, it was the void. Honorius was not an emperor. He was a boy afraid of noise, who cried when left alone, and whose first major political decision was to flee from Milan to Ravenna, a city that was not born as a capital, but as a bunker. And the man who pointed the way to that bunker was Stilicho himself. Stilicho was not just a general. He was the imperial tutor, the de facto regent, and the only operational executive of a broken empire. His power did not come from title, but from results. He defeated 200,000 Visigoths at Pollentia, crushed Radagaisus' invasion, and kept the Rhine frontier intact for a decade using armies he himself recruited from loyal barbarians. While Honorius signed documents, Stilicho signed war budgets, negotiated with the Huns, and decided who lived or died on the frontiers. But his ancestry was a double-edged sword: Vandal father, Roman mother. In other words, half impure in a civilization that considered ethnic purity a prerequisite for trust. Each of his victories was a personal insult to the Senate, which Olympius, the court eunuch, turned into poison. Your barbarian general is becoming more Roman than the Romans, and more powerful than the emperor. To neutralize criticism, Stilicho married his daughter Maria to Honorius in 398, officially becoming part of the imperial family. The marriage shielded his position, but accelerated his execution. Now political, enemies could claim that he did not serve Rome, but was creating his own dynasty. Every misstep by Stilicho was recorded by Olympius, the court eunuch who whispered in Honorius's ear, "Your barbarian general is becoming too powerful." Honorius still signed campaign orders, but for the first time began to doubt the man who had always decided for him. And in Ravenna, when an insecure emperor begins to doubt the only competent general he has, the question stops being if he will fall. It becomes only when. Transition, reinforced open loop. But the true betrayal would not come from Stilicho. It would come from those he saved. And it would arrive exactly 6 years later, when 30,000 Roman soldiers, not barbarians, committed a massacre that forever changed the meaning of imperial loyalty. Chapter 2. The Betrayal of the Saved. In early spring, at a frontier camp where the Rhine divides civilization from chaos, Stilicho orders the 5th Legion and the allied Vandal Regiment, both under his command, to cross the river and intercept an invading horde. At the head of that mass stands a face Roman officers already know, Alaric, king of the Visigoths, the same Alaric who, years earlier, fought as an ally of Rome in Theodosius' wars, received an official title, was promised pay and land, and never saw any of it delivered. Since then, he has lived in a perfect limbo, too strong to be ignored, too foreign to be integrated. The response to Stilicho's order is not, "Yes, sir," it is mutiny. Pure Roman legions refused to march alongside dirty barbarians, even though those barbarians had saved the capital twice the previous year. "We will not die for mercenaries who speak guttural tongues," shouts a tribune. Stilicho knows he needs both halves of his army, Romans with citizenship and barbarians who actually fight. But pressured by the prejudice of the officer corps, he makes the wrong choice. He does not arrest the Roman tribune, he arrests the Vandal commander. The mistake that will kill him begins here, not with a sword, but with a decision about whom he is willing to lose. What no one notices that day is that the men on the other side of the river are also watching. Alaric observes Rome humiliating its own barbarian allies and thinks, if this is how they treat those who fight for them, how will they treat those who fight against them? Without saying a word, he gains something more valuable than any battle, the future resentment of 30,000 soldiers who still wear Roman armour, but have already begun looking for another patron. 2 years later, the court eunuch Olympius wastes no time. The report of that mutiny reaches Ravenna distilled into a single poisonous sentence. General Stilicho loses control of Roman troops, favours barbarians. The emperor, now 21 years old, reads this as confirmation of his deepest paranoia. No one who is not 100% Roman can be trusted. He does not see divided legions. He sees a conspiracy. And he orders something no emperor had done in 4 centuries. That all non-Roman troops, even those who had sworn loyalty, even those who held citizenship, be disarmed and transferred to second-line units. It is the equivalent of saying, you may die for Rome, but you may not defend Rome. This is where Alaric ceases to be merely an external enemy and becomes an internal alternative. For years he had tried the diplomatic path. He asked for land within the empire, asked for a stable title, asked for what Rome had promised and never delivered. He was used as an ally, discarded as a barbarian, and ignored as a political actor. Now, suddenly, tens of thousands of federated soldiers, men who speak the same language as he does, worship the same god and have already heard his name whispered as King of the Goths, are humiliated by the same empire that humiliated him. Stilicho finds himself trapped between 2 worlds he himself helped build. To the pure Romans, he remains a barbarian in disguise who protects his own too much. To the loyal barbarians, he becomes the traitor who allowed Rome to disarm them. His own son-in-law, the emperor, begins to sign orders that publicly contradict Stilicho. When Stilicho protests, the response is silence. Silence is worse than denial. Silence means Olympius has won the argument without having to argue. Then comes the incident. No epic battles. Literally an alleyway massacre. The following autumn, soldiers of the pure 5th Legion storm allied camps in 3 different cities, not to disarm but to kill. 4,000 women and children of loyal barbarian soldiers are stabbed in their tents. The official orders said, disarm. The whispered orders said, exterminate. The Emperor did not order the massacre directly. He simply did not punish it when the reports arrived. And for 30,000 barbarian soldiers still fighting for Rome, not punishing was the same as ordering. When this happened, desertion was instantaneous and systemic. There was no revolt or mutiny, but rather a mass transfer of loyalty. 3 entire legions, 30,000 men whom Stilicho had trained, equipped, and led to victory, crossed the frontier. And this time, they knew exactly where to go. They did not flee into nothingness. They went to the only leader who for years had promised them what Rome always denied: pay, land, a fixed place within some order, even if that order was Gothic, not Roman. They went to Alaric's side. They did not desert out of love for Alaric, but out of hatred for the emperor. They wanted Honorius to pay for what his paranoia had allowed. Alaric suddenly ceases to command a wandering people and comes to lead an entire, professional army trained by Rome. Without losing a man, without winning a battle, he gains the tool he had always lacked: enough muscle to blackmail the capital. Stilicho realizes the point of no return the following winter. He writes a letter to his son-in-law, and the last he would ever send, with a sentence that sums it all up. You are killing the loyal to punish imaginary traitors. The result will be real traitors and loyal men dead. The letter is read. Olympius burns it. And in the first month of the new year, the emperor signs an unprecedented order to confiscate all of Stilicho's properties and declare him a latent public enemy, a man guilty without a crime and punished without any form of trial. But confiscating property does not bring down empires. What brings down empires is the death of the few generals who still know how to keep them standing. The next order to come out of Ravenna would not be to seize Stilicho's houses or lands, but to take his head. Not because he was in fact a traitor, but because after Rome pushed 30,000 soldiers into Alaric's arms, Stilicho became the only man still capable of negotiating with that army. And to a paranoid emperor, an indispensable man is more dangerous than any declared enemy. Chapter 3. The only mediator in the mountain. Cold, Alaric watches 30,000 men cross the frontier. They arrive not as invaders, but as fugitives carrying Roman shields. They are the elite Stilicho trained. Hunnic archers, Vandal cavalry, Gothic infantry, all swore loyalty to Rome, and Rome answered by disarming them, humiliating them, and allowing their families to be massacred. Now, for the second time in their lives, these men swear loyalty, but no longer to the empire, to Alaric. And that creates a new kind of nightmare. 30,000 hungry mouths, no pay, winter at the door. An unpaid army is not a force, it is a mutiny on a countdown. And a mutiny on a countdown is practically a death sentence for any king who cannot offer quick victory or stable security. Alaric then does what Rome should have done from the beginning. He sends messengers to Ravenna not begging for charity, but demanding a contract. He does not demand unimaginable treasures, nor a throne. He asks for exactly what Stilicho had promised in the name of the empire: land on the frontier to settle his people, a formal title within the Roman hierarchy, and, the most sensitive point of all, 3 years of back pay. It is little for an empire of 70 million people. It is a lot for a system accustomed to using barbarians as disposable tools. The request functions as a stress test. If Honorius honours his own general's word, a bridge to negotiation still exists. If he ignores it, Alaric knows that the only way to receive what was promised will be to stop asking and start taking. Ravenna's reply arrives in 3 parts. First, no. Second, never. Third. And if Alaric crosses the Rhine again, he will also be declared a public enemy. Olympius wrote the response. Honorius merely signed it. Olympius's calculation was simple. Paying barbarians encouraged more barbarians. Therefore, it was far better to show strength. In doing so, they killed 2 birds with 1, Stone also serving to prove before the Senate Stilicho's incompetence for having promised anything to barbarians. If Rome did not pay, the blame would not be on the empire. It would fall on the general who had sold himself to foreigners. Meanwhile, on the other side of the frontier, Alaric receives another report. His spies in Ravenna inform him, Stilicho has not only been overruled, but formally declared an enemy of the state. His properties have been confiscated and his closest officers imprisoned. The man who had defeated Alaric twice, who had saved Rome from simultaneous invasions and kept the empire breathing for a decade, was now a pariah, without land, without title, without a voice. The only Roman Alaric truly respected, the only one who understood that bargaining could be more useful than blood, had been silenced by an ambitious eunuch and a boy emperor afraid of his own shadow. Alaric now finds himself at an impossible crossroads. To march on Rome at that moment is still almost strategic suicide. The city is still ringed by walls, still has an army, still carries the reputation of being invincible. But not marching is political suicide. 30,000 deserters cannot simply return to nothing. They turn to him, and if he does not deliver victory, they will deliver his head. Honorius, in his refuge at Ravenna, sees the opposite. He believes he is winning. Each refusal seems to reinforce his authority. Each humiliation of Alaric in his mind proves that the Romans still rule. What he does not see, and Alaric sees perfectly, is that the only mediator between civilization and plunder has just been removed from the board. Then, on an August morning, the messenger arrives who ends all doubt. He does not come in Ravenna's official name. He comes from inside Ravenna. An imperial kitchen slave flees at night, rides to the Gothic camp, and delivers the news in a whisper. Stilicho is dead. Beheaded in the public. Square. The emperor signed the order with his own hand. The body thrown into a common ditch. The head hung on the city gate for 3 days as a warning. No Roman general protested. No senator dared to mourn. The last man who could still sit at the same table as Alaric was treated like a common criminal, precisely because he had tried to negotiate with him. Alaric does not call a council. He does not ask for opinions. The decision comes the instant he hears the story. Prepare the forced march, he orders, not to Ravenna. Ravenna is swamp and walls of fear. We are going to Rome. One of the commanders asks, and if they offer gold again? Alaric does not hesitate. They killed the only man who would have had the courage to accept gold. Now, on their side, there is only fear. On ours, from today on, there will only be ashes. Chapter 4. The city that forgot how to be afraid. Rome was not used to being afraid. Fear was something for provinces, for border villages, for people who saw smoke on the horizon and ran inside the walls. Rome was the wall of the world. No enemy army had seriously besieged the city for centuries. For many who lived there, the idea of a siege was a grandfather's tale, not a real possibility. That is why, when the bells of the basilicas began to ring without stopping, and messengers appeared breathless in the forum shouting that the Goths are in the fields to the north, the first reaction was not panic but denial. Senators laughed. Merchants said it was a rumour. An old asset of the city, the certainty that no one would dare, still seemed more solid than any wall. But that morning the city woke up to something different in the air. Silence. No grain convoys entered along the Tiber. No supply caravans crossed the gates. The river was watched, the roads blocked. Alaric did not need to attack. He only had to surround the city and wait. And the most humiliating part, much of the men now cutting off Rome's supply lines had, only months earlier, received Roman pay, answered Roman orders, bled for Roman banners. The capital of the most powerful empire in the world was discovering in real time what it meant to lose in 24 hours the only man who knew how to negotiate with the enemy, and with him the only break left to contain hunger. The truth is that in battles like this, a siege never begins with blood, but with scarcity. First the bread disappears from the stalls, then the olive oil, then the meat. At first the Roman elite still finds a way, buying on the black market, paying in gold for the scraps they once despised. When the gold runs out, the auction of dignity begins. Jewellery for grain, statues for sacks of flour, entire properties for crumbs of survival. Slowly, the city that ruled the world begins to be ruled by the stomach. Chroniclers of the times speak of dogs and rats fought over in the streets, of families boiling sandal leather to trick hunger. There are reports of parents selling small children as slaves, not out of cruelty, but in the hope that in another household they might at least have something to eat. Meanwhile, in Ravenna, protected by marshes, far from the smell of bodies and the sound of crying children, Honorius receives reports as if reading meeting minutes. There is no wheat, there is no olive oil, There is no order. The senators of Rome beg to negotiate. Alaric, even now with 30,000 more men thanks to the desertions, continues to send proposals. He wants money, he wants food, he wants land. He wants in practice exactly what had already been promised to him when Stilicho was still alive. The emperor's answer fits into a single word: no. No to gold, no to land, no to any office that would turn a barbarian king into an official piece of the imperial machine. For Honorius, yielding now would mean admitting that Stilicho had been right all along, that integrating barbarians was smarter than using them and discarding them. And admitting that would mean recognizing that the mistake was not trusting Stilicho. It was having him killed. Inside Rome, no one is worried about political theory. The people, and even the elites, are worried about what goes into the pot, if anything goes in at all. The same senators who called Stilicho a traitor now send at night secret delegations to Alaric's camp with a question that abandons all pretense of grandeur. How much does it cost for you to go away? The price is not symbolic, it is humiliating. Tons of gold, silver, fine fabrics, imported spices, selected slaves, everything that made Rome the showcase of the world becomes a ransom payment line. The Eternal City discovers that it can be treated like any border fortress, surrounded, strangled, blackmailed. After weeks of hunger and negotiation, the deal is sealed. Gates open, not to receive a liberating army, but to deliver wealth and people. Alaric, for now, accepts. He lifts the siege. His men move away from the walls. Rome breathes. Sermons in the churches thank God for the salvation. Senators congratulate themselves for having avoided the worst. The people return to the streets as if a nightmare had passed. But something has changed irreversibly, and everyone except Honorius realizes it. For the first time in nearly 800 years, a foreign enemy has proven that he can bring Rome to its knees without firing a single arrow against its walls. And he has discovered not only that the city has a price, but above all that true power no longer lies inside the capital, but outside it, in the hands of an offended barbarian king leading an army that the empire itself helped create. In Ravenna, Honorius interprets Alaric's withdrawal as confirmation of his genius. I held firm, he retreated, Rome is safe. In Rome, those who saw children dying of hunger know the uncomfortable truth. Rome was not saved. It was bought time. And while Stilicho remained dead, nothing prevented Alaric from returning whenever he wished, and he did return. The next time, he would not ask only for gold, he would ask for a new emperor, and with that Rome would discover that a single mistake of succession can turn the most powerful city in the world into a bargaining chip in a game it itself invented. Chapter 5. The Emperor Who Wasn't. 6 months after the ransom, Alaric is back, but this time he does not ask for gold. He asks for power, not as an ally, but as part of the machine. I want the title of Supreme Commander of the Western Legions, his message says. I want land in Italy for my men. I want a seat on the Imperial Council. Honorius, in his palace amid the marshes, laughs. He sends back a one-word reply. Never. Olympius adds another. Traitor. The same Senate that paid the ransom is now pressured to deny any official concession. The logic is childish. Yielding would legitimize Alaric. Refusing would keep Rome pure. Alaric is not surprised. He expected this. What Honorius fails to realize is that Alaric already has what he needs. A loyal army, 30,000 Roman deserters sworn to vengeance, and proof that Rome can be humiliated. What is missing is only formalism, and Roman formalism is easy to copy. In October, outside the gates, Alaric does something no barbarian had ever dared. He crowns a Romanized emperor. Priscus Attalus, a senator from a good family, famous for being eloquent and useless, receives the imperial crown not on the Capitoline Hill, but in a tent camp. The ceremony is perfect. Togas, incense, oaths. Only what truly matters is missing: legitimacy. On paper, Attalus looks like a perfect emperor. His Latin is flawless. He quotes Virgil from memory. He signs decrees full of solemn formulas, but decrees do not fill soldiers' bellies. No order makes ships sail if those who control the ports choose not to obey. The imperial bureaucracy, tax collectors, warehouse officials, harbour masters, does not organise a coup against Attalus. It organises something far more efficient: indifference. When he orders grain to be brought from Africa, the ships simply do not depart. When he decrees that the treasury pay the Gothic soldiers, no coffers are opened. On paper, Attalus is Caesar. In practice, he is just another senator shouting orders at people who pretend not to hear. It is then that Alaric realizes the fatal flaw of his own plan. Controlling the man who wears the crown is not the same as controlling the system that obeys, or refuses to obey, that crown. The power of Rome was never in the gilded metal on the emperor's head. It was always in the machine that keeps turning even when the one on the throne changes, and that machine hates outsiders who do not speak its silent language. From Ravenna, Honorius laughs and sends the message that sums up the humiliation. You have an emperor, I still have an empire that works. Alaric won Rome in symbol, but lost Rome in daily function. Inside the Gothic camp, patience begins to crack. Commanders murmur, he promised us land and gold. Instead, he gave us a senator in a toga. The same discipline that kept 40,000 men aligned through months of siege begins to fracture. Alaric is trapped by his own theatre. He cannot retreat. Admitting that Attalus was a mistake would mean confessing weakness before his warriors. He cannot advance. Without supplies, a frontal attack on Rome would be suicide. He remains suspended in the worst possible place for a commander, in between, with an emperor whom no one obeys and an army that is beginning to doubt whether he knows what he is doing. The solution comes from Honorius, not out of generosity but cold calculation. From Ravenna, he sends a secret message to Alaric. Depose Attalus, and I will give you exactly what you asked for in the beginning: land, title, payment. It is an obvious trap. Alaric knows it, but he also sees it as the only honourable exit from a plan that has already begun to rot. In December, before his principal chiefs, he does to Attalus what Roman emperors always did to puppets that ceased to be useful. He discards him. The crown is removed from his head. The imperial toga is torn away. The name Augustus is erased from documents. The great orator who dreamed of ruling the world returns to being just an elegant senator, spared only out of convenience. For Honorius, the move is perfect. He refuses to truly negotiate, forces Alaric to invent a parallel emperor, and then uses the fall of that emperor to prove that the Gothic king does not even control his own theatre. See, he can say to the Senate, even his emperor depends on me. But this efficiency is extremely short-lived, because by dismantling the farce, Honorius leaves Alaric with only two real options: accept the offer and become a puppet of Ravenna, in practice a domesticated barbarian chieftain, or do what no foreigner had ever done before, show that Rome is not only besieged or blackmailable, it is breakable. Attalus was deposed in December. The following August, Alaric would return, not to ask, but to take, and this time there would be no bribe to stop him. The first ransom showed that Rome paid to survive, the second showed that even paying, it continued to humiliate. What remained to the city was only one last layer of defence, the almost religious belief that being eternal meant being immune. It was exactly this illusion that Alaric was about to attack next. Chapter 6. The Gate that Opened from Within. The Salarian Gate on the northern side of Rome was built to withstand battering rams, ladders, and centuries of enemies, not to withstand a single exhausted man. In the early hours of a late August night, while the city tries to sleep on an empty stomach, 3 guards doze at their post. One of them wakes to a strange sound. It is not a shout, not the clash of sword against shield. It is the heavy snap of a bolt being pulled from the inside. There is no fight, there is no alarm. There is only a silent decision. Someone, perhaps bribed, perhaps threatened, perhaps simply exhausted from starving while the emperor raises chickens in Ravenna, pushes the lever that holds nearly 3 tons of iron and wood. The gate creaks open, slowly. The first man to cross the gate is not a warrior in shining armour. He is a Visigothic slave who had deserted into the city days earlier, swearing he could open the passage. He succeeds, when he appears at the mouth of the gate, gasping, the bolt still swinging behind him. Some Gothic soldiers instinctively raise their swords. Alaric cuts the gesture short at once. No one touches him. From now on, he is one of ours. The detail matters. Rome's gate was not smashed by violence, it was handed over from within, and that is far worse, because it makes clear that the city did not fall before the strength of 40,000 enemies, but before the desperation of a few starving Romans. The same emperor who killed the only general capable of negotiating a way out unknowingly, created an invisible army of the desperate behind his own walls. Alaric enters Rome and, with his very first command, does something that does not look like the act of an invader. He orders the Christian churches spared. No one touches the basilicas. No one lays a hand on the clergy. The gold of the altars belongs to God, not to Rome. This is not mercy. It is calculation. He knows the world is watching. If he burns churches, he becomes the savage barbarian of Roman propaganda. If he plunders palaces and spares temples, he projects the image of a disciplined king merely punishing a corrupt empire. And it works. Years later, bishops would write that Alaric acted with Christian moderation, while the capital of Christendom was searched from top to bottom. What follows over the course of 3 days is not chaotic massacre. It is organised looting. Palaces are emptied as if someone were conducting a rushed inventory. Tapestries rolled up, statues torn from pedestals, chests of silver and gold carried away. Fortunes accumulated over centuries vanish in hours. Women from noble families are taken as hostages, not to be sold in any common market, but to serve as collateral in future ransom negotiations. Each name becomes a value in gold recorded on wax tablets. The metal is counted, weighed, stacked onto wagons. In the end, however, what matters most is not what leaves the city, but what remains. The certainty that the empire that believed itself untouchable has just been treated like a stockpile of merchandise. Within the Gothic army itself, pressure builds. Some commanders want to go further. They want the churches burned as well. The city wiped from the map so no one ever forgets who did this. Now it's our turn to write history, they shout. Why stop at plunder? Alaric pulls hard on the reins. He knows that every extra hour inside Rome increases the chance that looting turns into slaughter, and that if that happens, his name will be remembered not as the king who humbled the empire, but as an uncontrollable beast. 40,000 obedient men can become 40,000 avengers in minutes. Many lost family because of Honorius's orders, and vengeance is a thirst no amount of gold can quench. Alaric sets a mental limit for himself. 3 days. 3 days to take everything he wants, and leave before Rome turns into a slaughterhouse that would haunt him forever. At the end of the 3rd day, before dawn, Alaric gives the order no one expected to hear from a conqueror inside Rome. Withdrawal. The caravans laden with gold, silver, fabrics and hostages depart through the same gates that opened silently in the night of the sack. Inside, the city remains almost intact. The walls still stand, the aqueducts still carry water, many houses were not even touched. What was destroyed was not stone, it was illusion. Treasure can be rebuilt, statues can be carved again, but the idea that Rome was invincible, the belief that kept senators arrogant, legions obedient and provinces paying taxes without question, that evaporates there, along with the dust of the Gothic wagons. When the Roman people finally dare to leave their homes, they do not find rivers of blood. They find emptiness, bare spaces where marble statues once stood, pedestals without gods, halls without furniture, the houses of the rich boarded up in haste, and above all they find silence. Silence different from that of the siege. It is not the silence of waiting, it is the silence of those who know that the next time the bells ring without stopping, it may not be to announce a 3-day sack, but a permanent occupation. In Ravenna, the same news produces a different sound. Upon learning that Alaric has left Rome, Honorius orders the chickens fed with the finest grain. "We won," he tells Olympius. "They went away." In the emperor's mind, the math is simple. If the enemy left, the city is still his. Olympius does not reply. He understands what his master does not see. Alaric did not leave defeated. He left testing limits. And every time Rome tried to buy peace with gold, it proved, unintentionally, that bribery is not a solution. It is an invitation for the enemy to return stronger. The bribe has already failed 3 times. The only lesson Alaric carries with him is that Rome respects only one language: force. Life, little by little, seems to return to normal, but that normal no longer exists. 3 months later, Alaric dies of fever on a distant beach. His brother Ataulf takes command. He inherits not only the army and the spoils, he inherits the newly written manual: how to besiege Rome, how to extort Rome, how to use Rome as bargaining currency in any negotiation of power. The next chapter of the story will no longer be about plundering stone and gold. It will be about succession, about who will dare to sit on a throne that still shines but no longer commands almost anything. Chapter 7. The Manual of Destruction. The most valuable part of the inheritance received by Ataulf was the manual. It was not written on parchment, but in actions. Step 1. Besiege Rome. Step 2. Offer negotiation. Step 3. When Honorius refuses, and he always refuses, create a puppet emperor. Step 4. When the puppet fails, sell loyalty back to Ravenna for gold and land. Step 5. Repeat until the empire collapses under its own weight. The manual works because Honorius, in his paranoia, cannot see patterns. He sees only isolated betrayal. An isolated betrayal requires punishment, and punishment creates more betrayal. It is the perfect loop that Alaric discovered, but Ataulf will run on an industrial scale. The truth is that Ataulf never wanted to destroy Rome. What he wants is to be part of it. To achieve this, Ataulf marries Galla Placidia, Honorius' sister, and sells the world a narrative that he will restore the Roman Empire, only now under Gothic leadership. On paper, it looks like reconciliation, the imperial family mixed with barbarian royalty. To Honorius, however, it is not an alliance, it is a kidnapping. He sees his own sister as a hostage, and reacts as he always has. He sends an army. Ataulf wins. Honorius refuses to negotiate. Ataulf, following Alaric's manual, plays the theatre card, proclaims another puppet emperor, governs in his name for a time, then trades that loyalty for land in Gaul. And so, the cycle repeats. Each new iteration not only drains the treasury, but dissolves the very idea that the emperor in Ravenna has any real authority. If any barbarian general can crown and uncrown emperors at will, what value does the crown still have? It is in this scenario that Ricimer enters, a general of Suebi origin, trained in Rome, a true specialist in applying the manual. He does not want to be king. He wants something safer, to be the man who chooses kings. In 15 years, he topples one emperor, installs another, topples him, again installs a third. None truly rule. Rome is no longer commanded from Ravenna. It is commanded from Ricimer's tent. He has no interest in a single great sack. He prefers continuous flow. Why burn the golden hens if you can force them to lay golden eggs every year? From this emerges the perfect arrangement. The emperor signs decrees, Ricimer decides their content, barbarian generals receive land and tribute, and Rome always pays the bill. But every time a general proves he can depose or install emperors, the next one learns an even more corrosive lesson. There is no need to bother. You do not need to depose the emperor if you can simply ignore him. Gundobad, king of the Burgundians, takes regions of Gaul and rules them as de facto sovereign, without asking for a title, without pretending submission. Honorius, and later Valentinian III, protest from afar, but protest without an army is just the rustle of paper. What is still called the Western Roman Empire becomes, in practice, a patchwork of barbarian kingdoms that feign obedience only when it brings them advantage. Alaric's manual evolves from how to extort Rome to how to live very well pretending that Rome still matters. In 476 AD, Odoacer, a general of Herulian origin, grows tired of the charade. He does not want to be a kingmaker, nor merely land and borrowed titles. He wants to be king outright. His troops, half made up of former Roman soldiers, half of barbarian warriors, neither part truly loyal to Ravenna, march on the capital. The emperor, Romulus Augustulus, is 16 years old. He does not rule. He never ruled. He is merely the mask other generals wore when they needed a Roman facade. Odoacer does not turn him into a martyr, but does something far more devastating. He removes the mask and does not put another in its place. He deposes Romulus and refuses to name a successor. He rolls up the imperial crown and sends it to Zeno, Emperor of Constantinople, with a message that needs no rhetoric. The West no longer needs this. You rule there. Here we rule. Honorius's mistake was not only ordering Stilicho's death, it was inaugurating a rule. The barbarian general is a disposable piece, used to the limit and thrown away when he becomes frightening. Every commander who came after learned the lesson in reverse. Do not be disposable, be indispensable, be the power behind the throne, not the man sitting on it. Stilicho died for being loyal to an empire that still believed in itself. Ricimer survived by being useful to a system that needed someone to press the buttons. Odoacer prospered by being inevitable. When he decided that the imperial theatre was no longer worth the effort, no one had the strength or the will to stop him. The empire did not fall under a single glorious invasion. It was abandoned, piece by piece, by people who realized that ruling their fragments directly was simpler and more profitable than maintaining the bureaucracy of something called an empire. Odoacer did not break Rome. He merely turned off the lights in an empty palace. Honorius's error, in 408, did not destroy an empire in 24 calendar hours. It created an entire system in which destroying empires seemed, for decades of generals and kings, more rational than trying to save them. The important question, looking back, stops being, why did Rome fall, and becomes another far more uncomfortable one. How did it take so long for someone to simply admit that it was already no longer standing? Chapter 8. The Empty Throne. At the beginning of September 476 AD, a document arrives in Ravenna that does not look like an imperial decree. It looks like an internal memo. It does not bear the seal of Romulus Augustulus, but it does carry the signature of Odoacer, general of the legions. The message is short and almost bureaucratic. As of today, the army no longer swears loyalty to Ravenna. The West will be governed by those who are here, not by those who rule from afar. Romulus is 16 years old. He occupied the throne for 10 months. He never commanded an army, never made a decision without first asking a bodyguard what he should do. He is an emperor without imperium, a title without real power. When he finishes reading, he does not panic. He cries with relief. The farce is finally over. Odoacer does not enter Ravenna as a triumphant conqueror. He enters as an auditor. His first gesture is not to order senators killed, but to open the account books. The second is to keep the machine running. The same officials, the same routines, the same taxes. The third is simply to change the recipient. Soldiers continue to receive pay, but now in the name of Odoacer, not of an emperor whom no one takes seriously. What from afar might look like a revolution is, in practice, a change of corporate registration. The empire was not overthrown in battle but bought for pennies on the dollar. And almost no one reacts, not out of cowardice, but because no one really believed that what they still called the Western Roman Empire was worth the effort of defending. But why did it take 66 years? Why, between the execution of Stilicho in 408 and the deposition of Romulus in 476, do we still see so many emperors, so many campaigns, so many desperate attempts to save the West? The real answer is a mathematics of illusion. Every general who passed through Ravenna, Ricimer, Gundobad, Odoacer, realized the same thing. Controlling an entire empire yielded less return than controlling just one's own peace. Maintaining the empire as a concept required paying bureaucracy in Rome, Ravenna and Constantinople, sustaining borders that no longer produced wealth, pretending to a unity that had, in practice, already dissolved. Gundobad, king of the Burgundians, is the perfect example. He governs part of Gaul in the name of the emperor, but the money never makes its way back. Taxes that once would have gone to Ravenna stay entirely with him. When Constantinople complains, he does not send tribute, he sends gifts. Gifts are cheaper than taxes, and politically they work almost the same way. Ricimer applies the same logic in Italy. He lives in Milan, commands the troops, decides who rises and who falls from the throne, and keeps a puppet emperor in Ravenna only so that the rituals continue. The empire turns into expensive theatre, and each new general learns the lesson. There is no need to tear down the theatre. It is enough to stop, paying the cost. Honorius dies in 423 still believing that he defeated Alaric. His successors, Valentinian III, Petronius Maximus, Avitus, and other names now forgotten, do not have that luxury. They inherit an empire that, in practice, is no longer an empire. They see provinces paying tribute to barbarian kings who continue, for convenience, to use the title of allies of Rome. They see armies with Roman standards obeying Germanic generals who speak Latin with an accent. What is still officially called the Western Roman Empire has become just that, a name, an empty brand stamped on coins and documents that no one takes very seriously anymore. Odoacer finally proves that, To kill an empire, it is enough to stop pretending it exists. On September 4th, he does not execute Romulus. The young man is sent to a country villa with a comfortable pension. Why? Because death would create a martyr, generate resistance, and keep alive the illusion that an emperor matters. Letting him live, old and irrelevant, proves that the title was always empty. Honorius's mistake in 408 was killing Stilicho, thinking the general was a threat to the throne. Odoacer's insight in 476 was to leave the throne empty because he understood that the throne itself was the threat to real power. Constantinople, upon receiving the imperial crown sent by Odoacer, does not react with war but with relief. The Eastern Emperor Zeno replies, "Keep it there, we have no resources for the West anyway." It is the official admission. The West is not worth the effort. The crown, which represented 1,000 years of global authority, becomes a museum ornament in a distant palace. Odoacer rules Italy as king. There are no more praetors, consuls, or a senate with power. There is only one man with swords that work and accountants who know how to add. The empire did not die with a bang, it died with a memorandum. Between the execution of Stilicho in 408 and the deposition of Romulus in 476, 24,360 days passed. The so-called single error did not bring down the empire in 24 calendar hours. It brought it down in 24 psychological hours, the interval between the moment Honorius decided that a loyal general was a threat and the moment Odoacer concluded that a puppet emperor was useless. From there on, everything else was just consequence in slow motion. That error was not tactical, it was conceptual. Honorius believed that the security of the empire depended on ethnic purity and absolute control of the throne. For nearly 1,000 years, however, what had kept Rome strong was the opposite: the ability to absorb peoples, integrate enemies, turn barbarians into allies, citizens, and sometimes generals. By ordering Stilicho's death, Honorius did not merely remove an efficient commander. He removed the last person who still believed in practice that Rome could continue to be a machine of integration, and not merely a museum of past glories. The question in the title, "How did a single mistake sink this empire in 24 hours?" thus finds its final answer. The mistake was not simply executing Stilicho, it was believing that executing him would solve anything. In that instant, Roman leadership traded an uncomfortable logic of trust for a logic of permanent paranoia. Everything that followed, sieges, sacks, puppet emperors, Odoacer's memoranda, was not exactly the fall of a healthy giant. It was the slow farewell of something that, in essence, had already died on the day it chose fear over competence, imaginary purity over proven loyalty. Stilicho was executed on August 22nd, 408. Rome officially fell on September 4th, 476. But the empire in truth died the moment paranoia became state policy. The question that remains is not only historical, but personal. How much time is there, in your own life, between your best decision and your last mistake, the one in which you, like Honorius, decide to eliminate precisely the person who keeps you standing?